Hello, welcome to Kimmel Bay Church Vlogs. Today we're looking at Matthew 5 and we're looking at the question, what does Jesus want? When my children were younger, they used to love to play a game called Opposite Day. And to be honest, it used to drive me mad. If anybody said anything, you had to do the opposite. And it was really confusing and very frustrating, especially when I was trying to get them to do something that I wanted them to do. As we open up Matthew 5, it reminds me of that childhood game that my children played. The statements are declarations of blessings, but not where you would expect blessings. Matthew 5 is also known as the Sermon on the Mount, and it opens up with these statements, the Beatitudes, statements beginning with the word blessed. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. And it goes on and on. These statements are affirming a blessing which is already in place. Many of the statements recognize that a group of people who would normally be thought of as being afflicted are actually blessed. Many of these situations are beyond the individual's control. If they have put their trust in God, then no matter how difficult their circumstances are here on earth, they will be blessed in eternity. The Beatitudes are counterintuitive. We go down in order to go up. Death precedes resurrection. We get to joy by traveling through grief. Our natural instinct is to try and avoid grief. But God says, no, you must travel through grief. But the good news is, he says, I'll go with you. We'll do it in my strength. Even when life is unfair, God is still good. The Beatitudes paint a picture of God's kingdom. They describe the character. They're not conditions that must be met for salvation. And as we move further on into Matthew 5, Jesus tells his followers, you are the salt of the earth. Salt has dozens of uses in the Bible. In fact, Romans were often paid in salt. This is where the phrase comes from, he's not worth his salt. Wars were fought over salt. Salt was extremely valuable, and the early disciples would have had no doubt that Jesus was saying how important they were in the world and how important it was for them to keep God's word, to stay true to Jesus' teachings so as not to lose their salt, their way, their flavour. Just as if salt loses its saltiness, how can it preserve the meat or bring out flavour? If Christians lose their way, deviate from the true teachings of Christ, how can they teach the truth to those around them? How can they have any effect for the gospel? They can't. Jesus goes on to tell his disciples, they are the light of the world. As Christians, we should be seen in the world and our light should be seen. I remember as a child visiting someone with my dad, and they lived in a really old manor house, the sort that you would pay to go and visit. And whilst I was there, I needed the bathroom. So they gave me directions. When I arrived at the bathroom, it was in darkness. So I switched on the light and I saw the largest, most beautiful bathroom I have ever seen. It had an old roll-top bath with gold taps and was very decorative. A sink that was big enough to have a bath in, again with gold taps and very ornate. Long heavy curtains that were embroidered with pictures hung on the windows. They looked like the pictures could tell a story. The walls were covered in beautiful velvet patterned wallpaper and huge gold framed pictures. I was quite taken aback by this bathroom. I'd never expected such beauty in a bathroom. But it didn't matter how beautifully decorated that bathroom was. Without the light, I wouldn't have seen any of it. And Jesus is saying we need to let our light shine, not for our own glory, but so those around us can see the good works and glorify our Father in heaven. In the final paragraph, Matthew 5, Jesus repeated a phrase several times. You have heard it said that, but I tell you. You have heard it that said that, but I tell you. With each repetition, Jesus said a familiar commandment from the Older Testament, and then exposed the heart attitude from which these evil doings originate. For most people, murder is easy to avoid, but it can be difficult to free ourselves sometimes from the anger in which murder incubates. Each time, Jesus calls us to go a step further than just not breaking the commandment. Jesus wants us to be at a level of honesty and integrity where good on the outside flows from being good on the inside. These statements throw off all misunderstandings about what constitutes a devotion to God. How could they possibly live this countercultural lifestyle and become these perfect people that Jesus described? This was a realization that they needed to come to understand that they couldn't possibly do it on their own. Jesus was offering those that were listening in the audience a glimpse of the power his Spirit could work through them. The kingdom of heaven was within their grasp. Jesus was showing them what it looked like so that they would hunger for the freedom that salvation would bring. This freedom is explained in Romans 8. Those who were once bound to the deeds of the flesh and perishing under the burden of the law would be set free in Jesus' righteousness as God's own children. All of the statements that Jesus made here, the one which startles us the most, is perhaps Christ's advice, avoiding sin. Matthew 29, if your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. I don't believe Jesus is commanding us to literally gouge out our eye, but rather, if something is causing us to sin, then we should take action to address it. Darren Spoo gives a graphic example in his book. In 2003, a climber named Aaron Ralston was biking and hiking alone in Blue John Canyon of Utah. An 800-pound boulder shifted as he moved across its surface, trapping his hand beneath its immovable weight. For several days, Ralston awaited rescue. After his water supply had depleted, he made the ghastly decision to sever his forearm to save his life. Serious sin calls for drastic action. There will be pain, but we must deal with it and move on. To go back to our original question, the title of today's vlog, what does Jesus want? I believe Jesus is saying he wants us to become more like him until we are fully become like him, and in doing so, show others the way to and of Christ. The only way to do this, though, is through Christ himself, in his strength and his righteousness, by what he has achieved on the cross.